special edition of our Fielding Alumni Focus webinar because our panelists are not only presenting just today, but they'll be speaking at our summer session in Chicago as a part of the alumni track in July. Today's webinar will give you just a taste of what they're presenting at session. I'd also like to share that they have written an article about today's topic. So when we're done, if you visit fielding.edu, go to News and Media, they have the article titled Welcome to Our Garden. So there's more resources here just besides what's happening today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Fielding alumna, Dr. Julie Benesh. As an academic leader, Dr. Benesh oversees approximately 400 graduate students and 50 faculty in the areas of business psychology and organizational leadership, including chairing many doctoral dissertations. She has presented at numerous international conferences, including Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, OD Network, Transformative Learning and Association for Psychological Type International, and has authored over 75 blog posts on leadership, work-life balance, work relationships, and productivity. Julie, thank you so much for getting this started today, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Hillary. My cat saw an insect on the other side of the window and was getting really excited there. Okay. Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm trying to advance my slides. Yes, okay. So we're from, just to let you know, my co-panelist, Dr. Elizabeth Schwab, and myself, and our co-author, Dr. G.W. Hay, who will be joining us at summer session and who co-wrote the article. We're all from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So I did want to say that. I'm also very interested when we talk about being scholar practitioners, and our three journeys were all a little bit different, but one of the things we wonder is how it would be different had we not gotten to where we are at the point that we did in terms of our history, and like Liz got her higher ed position very soon after she got her doctorate. So anyway, I want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about that story of how I got there, and then invite my colleague to tell her story. And I was in, like a lot of Fielding HOD alums, I had been in organization development for a long time, and before I decided to go back and get a doctorate. And I remember seeing at ODN conferences, seeing Fielding students and Fielding alums, and always thinking that those people are so cool. If I ever had the chance to go back to school, which I honestly didn't think was very likely, that's where I would go, because they seem so vibrant and engaged, and especially given how old a lot of them were, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I want to be like that. And I think I kind of am like that. So that all worked out. But one of the things I remember at one of the summer sessions in Kansas City was hearing about a little informal research that some alums had done to find out that a lot of HOD alums end up in higher ed, and that this is not something that's planned necessarily, but just how things work out. And again, at the time I thought, oh, that's so interesting, but that won't be me. That's kind of cool, but that won't be me, because I just came here to be better at my job, and particularly I thought I was really good at my job as an organization development director at an academic medical center. But I wanted to really be able to articulate my positions better, because so many times it's like I knew something that the organization was doing was not going to work. And you know, a lot of people in OD are in this position, right? So it wasn't, you know, entirely unique, but I would just feel like, I know it's not going to work, but I couldn't say why. It's just like, I just I just know. And I had a hope based on actually something that I'd read on the Fielding website, where they did this composite kind of case study of a person's journey through the HOD program. And that's exactly what she said. She says, I want to be able to say why I believe what I believe and have credibility and be able to have thereby more influence. So that's why I was there. And I really had no plans of being in higher ed. But actually, that's exactly what happened. And a few months after graduating, I was in higher ed, and not as an adjunct, but as a program faculty member. And it's been very interesting. So I'll say much more about that. But first, Liz, could you please talk about how you got here? Because nobody, like when they're a little kid, you don't say, I want to be a scholar practitioner. I mean, I've never heard of that. So how does one get here?
I think that's really funny that you say that. Nobody says that, because when I was a kid, no, I didn't. Actually, I was really in love with watching Matlock, and so I thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. It didn't work out, and I'm really thankful that it didn't, because I'm exactly where I should be. I got to my doctorate in a roundabout way, but basically after my master's, I thought, there's more, isn't there? And the answer is yes. And so I enrolled in the doctorate program and never looked back. And of course, like Julie was saying, I was picked up pretty quickly for a core faculty position after graduating. And one of the reasons was that I was adjuncting during my program and loved it, found that I had a thirst for it and that the academic bug had bitten me. I didn't want to leave. I kept asking for more things to do that were well beyond my small adjunct position. And finally someone took pity on me and said, do you want a job? I gratefully accepted. So that is where I'm at. Many of the things that you're saying just really ring true to me as well. Nobody sort of plans this, but once you're into it, it's a passion that you can't escape.
Well, it sounds like we both worked for free. One of the things I didn't mention was that while I was in my OD director role, I was practitioner faculty in the medical centers, universities, health systems management master's program. So I worked for free there.
We all did.
So thank you so much, Liz. And our conclusion of our blog article was that we need a space to cultivate as scholar practitioners, because it's not exactly the scholar space and it's not exactly the practitioner space either, but we need to value ourselves and one another. And we need to cultivate that value for ourselves. Is there any comment that you'd like to make on that particular metaphor?
I mean, in terms of this metaphor, it's really important to realize that you have to go beyond planting seeds and then abandoning your garden. It's something that you have to nurture and cultivate, as the screen says, throughout your life and throughout the different seasons of our careers.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. This is kind of how I felt as I was leaving my old job. One of the things that our senior HR VP actually said was, Julie is very creative, but we don't really need creativity right now. We're looking more for standardization. So I think there's cultivation that's more organic. And then again, in another context, there's overcultivation or overcultivation.
The lesson there is to embrace your environment and appreciate it.
And I do, don't I? I really do. Yeah. I don't think it is a coincidence about people ending up in these jobs even those of us that didn't really think we would or expect to, I think they are the environments that actually do value us and know what we have to offer, that they want people that can have that kind of both and perspective. And we talked about how our clients, such that we still have some, are also people that tend to be interested in that other perspective, at least open to it. So we've got, like the little farm to table artisanal vegetable garden. It doesn't have to be just either flowers or the corporate farm, right?
Yep. It can be small, it can be to order, it can be suited to who you are and who your client is.
So again, we just kind of concluded that we need to form a third space where theory and practice coexist to cultivate our own cultures with fertile ground for knowing and doing, for disseminating knowledge and results, and for being whole. And from this third space, we can move forward free from the burden of separatist assumptions. But we really do think it is a third space. And in our summer session, what we're going to do is really bring out the lived experience for ourselves and also the participants of what that is. And part of that is making the roots of our traditions on both sides visible. And my big epiphany in the HOD program was Stephen Pepper, hearing about Stephen Pepper's root metaphors. And I'm like, wow, that explains everything. Now, the problem was most people have never heard of it, but at least I've heard of it. And I can bring that knowledge to bear. Liz, did you have one of those kind of epiphanies when you were going through your business psychology doctoral program?
It happened even earlier than that, and I think we have a slide that sort of describes the same metaphor, the duck swimming, and
okay.
It came from a manager, a leader in my company that was inspirational and really revealed to me that the client doesn't see the work, they're not supposed to, and it really formed how I am as a professional and how I work with others, including my students.
All right. So this one, right?
This is the one. So Ben Newby, if you're listening out there somewhere, this is what changed my life. We were working and we had a very busy afternoon, and he said, don't ever show the customer what's going on underneath, that you are the duck gliding smoothly on the surface of the lake. And for me, this evolved as a academic as my academic, history grew, to mean that when a client hires you, this is when the students often ask me, where am I supposed to integrate the theory? How do I show the client what I'm doing? And often in their papers, I describe how they'll have a webinar or some sort of training session where they will teach them psychological principles. And I say, no, they would have gotten a psychology degree if that's what they had wanted to know. They hired you to solve the problem. And so I think back to Ben Newby's duck, and it really is about the theory being the legs and the support for who you are on the surface, gliding through and helping to solve problems.
Great. Thank you so much. Another bird metaphor. I think another thing that we do is we can go to a higher level where, just as we can go to the roots where things are connected, we can also go to a higher level. In the middle, things might not be able to be overtly connected, but at the roots and at the meta level, when we take a bird's eye view, then we can see the connections that are not that apparent when we're in the middle of stuff. So here are some things that we thought of that kind of fit around being a scholar practitioner. We're going to talk a little bit about each of them. Interdisciplinarianism, boundaries, conventions, contracts, ways of doing, thinking, learning, and being, and bias exploration and versus bias acceptance or bias correction. So starting with interdisciplinarianism, I remember someone from the HOD program saying it's not so much the scholar practitioner model, it's the interdisciplinarity of HOD that creates the larger challenge. I think it was either Bob or Dorothy, but it could have been anybody, though, frankly. And I don't think that's a coincidence either. I think it's definitely true and an important way to look at it in terms of interdisciplinarianism instead of just having more than one role. But I think applied disciplines do tend toward interdisciplinarity because, again, uncoincidentally, practitioners make use of whatever works. So it doesn't need, and that's one of the strengths, I think, of practice, is that you're not bound by being in one discipline, but it's also a strength of interdisciplinary scholarship. It makes it super complicated, yes, to do scholarship, but I think as a practitioner, interdisciplinarity comes pretty naturally.
I think that's one of the main things that you learn being in a doctorate program as well, is how to integrate constantly within your environment. And so you might take inspiration from areas in which may on the surface not seem to connect, but in your work will make sense. You know, I was just working on a client engagement the other day, and they have a question about how to engage their customers while they're waiting for prescriptions to be filled. And I made a connection to Ace Hardware. It doesn't seem like it would fit, but the things that this client is trying to implement and have successfully connect with their clients is working for Ace Hardware. I mean, you may not see the connections, but it's really important to sort of stay open, constantly be looking in your environment for inspiration, and constantly be integrating, thinking about ways that you can blend disciplines.
So some boundaries, conventions, contracts. Now let's look at some ways that they are kind of incompatible. And thank you, Dr. Hay contributed a lot to our thoughts on the incompatibilities and incommensurabilities and conflicts between these roles. And practitioners pretty much have to accept the client-framed problem or else fight uphill to reframe it. It's unusual. Like as an internal consultant, we would pitch, interventions at senior leadership, and they usually were not interested. They had their own set of problems that they wanted to address on their own terms. And I'm not saying they never listened, but they were in charge, and basically it was, we were not advantaged in those discussions necessarily. Then practitioners are judged on the results, and that's the results that the clients are looking for. So that's either of addressing the problem as it was defined or appearing to do so, with emphasis on the political realities and optics. So we were talking at an OD network regional Chicago meeting a couple weeks ago on change management, and talking about how change efforts fail, but nobody ever admits that they fail. They always succeed. They were great. And it's like, well, they weren't. And clearly they were not. But that's always how it's framed. And then you're rewarded when you do that with money or, you know, more engagements, etc. On the scholarship side, it's very different because when you write a paper, you get to choose your paradigm. You get to choose your intended audience. You get to choose your assumptions, your definitions, and your framing. As long as you lay it all out there, it's your choice. And we often tell students this. It's like they can't believe it. It's like, what? I said, you pick this, and this, and they're so not used to that. And you're judged on the convincingness and scrupulosity of its internal integrity. Like you say, here's where all this stuff came from, and people must judge it on its own merits. Now, they may not read it because that's not something they would ever be open to, but this is very different. And you're rewarded with peer respect and personal satisfaction. And very much like what your boss told you, Liz, about the clients don't need to know all of the things that go into it. One of the things that my boss of many years would say about the work that we did in our department as practitioners was, she said, you know, only your colleagues and peers will ever know just how great you really are. And you really are. And we've got to give that respect to one another. And I think that's kind of a way to bring these two things together. This is stark, isn't it, though?
It's a stark difference, and I think this is what reinforces sometimes the idea that they can't be blended, that it isn't one model, and that often professionals will struggle managing the role because they conceptualize it as two separate roles. Given different structures for each, you can see why.
Actually, I have a question. I'd love to jump in here.
Sure.
So looking at this slide right here, how has the world of being a scholar practitioner changed or evolved in the last 10 years? Is there any way to look at this and see, here's where we are now, and this is where we were 10 years ago, and how do they mix together? How are they separated? I'm really curious about that.
I think people are becoming more conscious of it. I think if at least there's certainly on the scholar side, there's a lot of writing about it. It's kind of mostly complainy kind of writing, like things still aren't what they should be. But at least scholars are recognizing that practitioners have relevant knowledge and that practitioners are open to receiving relevant knowledge, and that there are people out there with a foot in each camp who can serve as, at least in organizational studies and management studies, who can serve as kind of like the interpreters or translators. What would you say, Liz?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would say that technology has had a huge impact on both of these roles, or the one role that we're talking about conceptually. And in terms of the practitioner side of things, I'm finding that my clients are much more educated in the scholar side than they used to be. They know what to ask for by name. They ask for behavioral scientists. They say, do you know anything about behavioral economics? And some of that has to do with, you know, social media sites like LinkedIn and Facebook that are making it more friendly and more accessible to the novice. And that enables them to speak our language a little bit more clearly and really ask directly for what they want.
Information is becoming so much more accessible, or if you want to call it, data is becoming more transparent. And I think that is bringing these two things together, because obviously they both require, you know, actual knowledge, information, and data to be acted on. So one of the things that we do in one of our programs in our Masters in Organizational Leadership is we take an experience that most of us have had as consultants. Wonder if anyone else can relate to this, but where you have an executive hand you some leadership bestseller that they just read on a plane. They picked up at the airport, read it on their flight, and now they feel like, well, we're all good now. Just do this. Make a program out of this, and we'll be set. And so what we're having students do as their capstone in that program is to take an airport book and analyze it for what underlying empirical data and theories it has or doesn't have. So that's a way that we are trying to help students who are, who have that practitioner background or who don't or anticipating it. They're trying to get into that. We're like, well, this is what it's like. Someone will hand you a book at some point and tell you to do this. And it's good to know whether or not it's going to work. And one way to figure out whether it will or won't work is what is the actual data behind it that shows whether in your situation that will translate.
And I really like about this model too is that you're really helping to teach students how to have a healthy amount of skepticism, which sometimes is lacking in organizations, especially as new professionals. And I say new, even though students are entering with a lot of professional background and expertise. But when you're just getting your doctorate, you've got a rebirthing process that you're going through, and you're reformulating that professional self that you are. So whoever you were before the doctorate, you won't be that same person again. And this really helps to breed that sort of that skepticism that you need into your work to make you a better practitioner.
That's right, because it's about, and this is really your area, but biases. Every situation, every environment comes with its biases, and we really need to rather than just say, well, that's the way it is, and not examine them. Or we also see this all the time, going in the other direction and overcorrecting for someone else's biases because they have them and we don't. Of course, we don't have biases, right? We're the correctors of biases. It's like, no, we all have them. And so practitioners, until they get radicalized and just and maybe they don't ever get there until they actually do go back and learn from a different perspective. But they're oftentimes relatively unconcerned with bias unless it's directly getting in the way of a desired outcome. So even if clients are looking at stakeholder interests, the frame we were talked about, frame in the very beginning of this conversation, is generally superficial and in managerialist terms. And it's always funny to me when I say something about, well, that's managerialist, and people look at me blankly. Yeah, it's an ist, it's an ism, it's always looking at things from that perspective, which again, a practitioner is going to do. That's what they're there to do, to help the management, to help the man, to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does suck you into one perspective on reality that is not the only perspective on reality. So what we need to do is to look at their biases, ideally help them look at their biases, and also look at our own biases. Liz, I know you have a lot to say on biases?
I don't know if I have a lot. I mean, my core area of interest is behavioral economics, which really has a foundation in understanding biases and how it affects our interpretation of information and how it affects our ability to make decisions. And if you've never heard of it, I highly recommend a book called Judgment and Decision Making at Work, put out by PSYOP. And you can locate it on their website or just Google it or go on Amazon. And what it really talks about is all the different ways that behavioral economics can be applied in organizations and how biases interfere with a lot of different processes and programs within organizations, down from selection and promotion all the way up to leaders and managers and their ability to make decisions. You know, and one of the best parts of getting the doctorate and going through the process of growth was the opportunity for self-exploration and really a chance to examine your personal biases and how that affects not only your work, how you interpret others' work, you know, sort of like the idea of the Johari window, you know, where you're having an effect on the environment and the way that you perceive others is having an effect on them and their perception of you. And it's really important to keep that always at the forefront of your mind when working with clients, because not only are you making sure that your biases stay in check, you're also examining others for biases that may be occluding their judgment or their ability to see data that's in front of them. And then being able to take them through that in a collaborative way in order to garner support and to make sure that your clients are receptive. It's not always easy to face the fact that you have biases. And sometimes we have biases that are ugly, and that's okay. You have to just say, I'm human. Somehow I got this, like I have green eyes. That's okay, but I can change it. I can put on new lenses and I can see my world differently simply through a self-examination.
Well, and it's a lot like triggers, right? I mean, we all have things that trigger us. And you know this from working with people closely, you know, over time, that they're always, it's like interpreting things in a certain way. It's like you pull a string, like they'll hear a certain cue and they'll say this thing that they always say. They'll have the same reaction that they always do. And it's not that there is not a grain or even a bushel of truth to it, but it's just that it's so habitual that it becomes unconscious, and that means that there's ways that it could be fruitful to engage that they're not engaging.
Right. And biases, you know, they can work for us sometimes, right? In academia, we call them heuristics. Rules of making. But even a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
Yep.
I mean, sometimes these heuristics or biases are going to work for us. It's the times when they don't, when it gets dangerous, when we're not seeing the information that we should be, that's really when you have to explore, okay, maybe something's going on here that I need to explore a little bit further.
And yeah, and that's certainly true in the world of practice. That's that whole know-how. It's like, oh, and they've done studies on with doctors, and it's like they think they are being so both wise and discerning and objective, when actually what they're doing is being biased. And like you said, and it works sometimes. But if you're the patient for whom it doesn't work, then that wasn't so great for you.
Watch your outcomes, watch what your clients ask for. If they're asking for the same thing or reacting in the same way, think about what you're doing. Maybe you're using the same things over and over again and it's not working.
Yep. Well, I have an example of a typical first draft dissertation problem statement. And I think this is fine for a draft. I mean, you have to start somewhere, but they will say something like, there's a problem of corporate leaders showing favoritism. This hurts employee engagement and productivity. It has to stop. And I remember when I would write my applied papers at Fielding, at least when I was there in HOD, we had 3 papers for each knowledge area. And one would be an overview, one would be an in-depth, and one would be applied. And my favorite was always to write the applied. It was like, because I would just take some burning issue that had to do with whatever the topic of the course was and write about how it actually played out in the work environment. And it was super cathartic. And again, I think that people go into these areas because they want to make the world a better place. They want to make organizations a better place. They don't want to just, prop up the systems that are already in place that may or may not be working the best for the most people. They really want to do something, but they're still, again, going to be triggered by cues of things that are personally meaningful to them. So we might work with a statement like that and help them end up with something like, there's a lack of research about the buffering behaviors that successful workforce outgroup members with a personal history of employer victimization enact. And on the one hand, I could see somebody looking at these and saying, I like that first one much better. It's much more straightforward. I understand it. You academics, it's so hard to understand. But there are reasons why things are put in certain ways. We need things to be defined, definable, verifiable, not everything always contestable. But the point is, it's the same study that they're going to end up doing. They had to narrow it down. They had to define everything. And yeah, once they actually do it, if practitioners actually read it, it could actually improve practice.
And I wanted to point out too that it's very typical with the first statement. It's called a first draft dissertation problem statement. You'll see that the language is inflammatory. I would guess that student probably has some sort of emotional tie with the subject area.
No doubt.
That is really revealing about that person's point in their development. This is part of the self-exploration that we talk about sometimes, is that you're really taking it from the first statement to the second statement. It begins to remove the focus on the student's own opinion, own emotions about the topic. It starts to objectify it a little bit more and make it more manageable, more measurable, and less biased, which is really important.
Yep. Yeah, and of course, people always say that your dissertation topic really is about you. On the other hand, if you're going to learn anything from it, it needs to be still something where you are actually producing knowledge as detached from your biases as possible. You do need something motivating that will carry you through. And I think weaving those things together is part of learning to be a scholar practitioner. So, what do you all think?
Hello, I am back here. I have a couple of questions that came through that I'll pass on.
All right.
This is kind of going back actually to the original introduction of the two of you, is why do you think OD professionals end up in higher ed?
I think, well, the ones that go back to school certainly do. And a lot of the ones that don't, because I know a lot of our students also, a lot of our students know that they want to be in higher ed and they're already adjuncts. I think that they both are about growth and learning. Personally, for me, I love that I am a line manager in a business that I actually understand the product and feel like I know how to produce it, or service. It's both, really, right? It's a transformational thing, and I love that it's actually where we get our revenue from, and I can be a part of that. I just think that's awesome. When I worked in healthcare, it was like, I'm not a nurse. I'm not I'm not really helping. I'm helping, but I'm not really involved in our revenue. I am a cost. Everybody knows it. I hope I'm a good investment, but I love having an influence on how we actually affect that transformation through the pipeline. What do you think, Liz?
I think consulting and teaching are the same thing. I mean, I think that a student or a client is coming to you for the same issues, for the same challenges, for the same hopes. And I think that it's not really an opposite end of the spectrum type of thing. I think it's just two sides of the same coin, that we're all doing the same or similar tasks. We're just doing it maybe in different ways. I often find myself teaching my clients what's going on behind the scenes, what the psychology is of it. You know, having said already the duck with the legs under the water, sometimes they want to see the legs.
They want to know.
Yeah, I mean,
that's completely different.
We just designed a behavioral economics workshop for a pharmaceutical company. They wanted to know the theory behind it. They wanted to teach their employees how to be more innovative thinkers at work. There's nothing wrong with that, you know, and it feels good doing both. I don't really think that they're two different things. They don't feel different to me.
Well, that actually, I think it lead into the next question that I had for both of you, and this again goes back to cultivating your garden and mentioning that it's important to, you said something along the lines of sowing your seeds or planting your seeds. Can you give an example of a successful seed?
Your doctorate.
Along with your doctorate.
Yeah. Where do you want to take it, Julie? I mean, I think there's a lot of different seeds you can.
Oh, yeah, everything.
Cultivate.
Everything. Keegan said something like, I'm gonna mess up what Keegan said, but it made a big impact on me when I read it, which is that schools should be a place where everything that happens is about learning. And that's, and literally, and Raven, our department manager, said something really similar to that. I'm like, Raven, are you reading Keegan in your master's program? But she said, oh yeah, when there's a problem, like there's a problem, and oh, there's so many problems in schools. I mean, it's okay to say that, right? We many of us work at schools. I haven't seen one that didn't have, they're complicated places. And there's always the potential to learn. And we need to look at it like that. She's like, yeah, somebody didn't know something. That's where most of the problems come from. And so we're here to help them by bringing, creating that knowledge together. And it's like, that is so true. So I think everything is a seed. And I think everything, when it's not always about problems either. The weeds, those are the weeds that you have to pull up. But I mean, I think it's also when we notice something that someone else did that had an impact or could have an impact or had an impact on us, that is also a seed. I think like my conversations with prospective students, they're so polite, and they're like, oh, I know you're busy, don't want to bother you. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like the most important thing for me to do, because someday they'll be a student. It affects how they're going to be a student. It affects how they're going to be an alum. And what's going to happen to the field, I think that everything we do is important and has an impact.
And for me, in terms of seeds, a lot of it is relationship cultivating and building, whether that be for networking purposes or perhaps to facilitate working together within an organization. As you can imagine, having so many different departments within an institution with different goals and sometimes conflicting goals and methods of getting there, it can be difficult to get things done. And you really need to sort of grow those relationships with others and say, we actually are working for the same thing, and finding ways to do that. And what happens is it really opens the door for bigger things to happen down the road. And that happens whether you're doing it with clients and you're saying, you're slowly working on them to uncover biases or, perhaps problems that you see but they're not ready to see yet. You're sort of beginning to plant the seed and open the door to having those conversations. And down the road, that really opens not only their ability to engage in these things and to think about these things, but also your ability to help and your ability to grow as a professional.
You're raising the tone. I mean, we want to do better work. and I remember that as a consultant, as an internal consultant for a long time too. It's like we always wanted to make the organization better and to make our place in it more effective.
Yeah. That actually is, I think, a perfect time to my last question for both of you. In looking at your presentation at the Alumni Track at summer session, let's say students will be attending your class as well as alumni. So could you, each one of you, give an example of one successful practice or habit outside of networking? Because we already have got the networking down, but something that will get you through that graduation line and then into success as an alum and post, following your graduate, just any words of wisdom.
Writing is so important. Establish a writing practice. Cultivate good associations with the act of writing. Deal with any issues that you have around writing. That is a key.
And I think for me, my greatest recommendation would be to seek out opportunities for anything and everything. Take advantage of the resources that your school offers. Take advantage of resources or opportunities that might be in your environment, in your community. No one is going to come find you. You have to go out there and present yourself to the world. And through increased, experiences with a diverse group of people, that's really how you're going to grow. That's how you're going to be a successful professional. And that's how you're going to know what you're going to do when you graduate too.
Excellent. That's just what I was looking for. Thank you so much. I just want to say to both of you, Julie and Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and your knowledge. And I really look forward to seeing both of you in Chicago. And just as a reminder for our viewers that you can visit us on fielding.edu/alumni, and also on our new YouTube channel. We will be posting this video, and we will be sharing it with our students and alumni. So Julie and Elizabeth, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you too in the near future.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.